Um, I have a question that we talked about yesterday about how to deal with suffering, and mostly how do you deal with being political and seeing all these things that are very upsetting without getting hopeless. And I noticed I was reading Joanne Macy, and she said that she has developed approach which deals with despair and empowerment work, and this approach helps people to overcome denial by acknowledging their pain for the world to experience this pain as healthy evidence of their interconnectedness in the web of life, and to recognize the systemic interdependence as a source of their power to take effective action.
Sounds great.
So I was just wondering...
How does she do it?
She has a whole system.
Yeah, there you go. Sounds lovely.
That she uses to help with this deep ecology.
Right.
And anyhow, I'm just curious, in your own words, how you would, if someone were to come to you, how you would, what you would say to...
That as we deepen in our practice and...
Can you repeat part of the question? Sorry.
In reference to how we relate to the world outside of us
and how we
and
deal
the
with
suffering, as our compassion and mindfulness strengthen, we have the capacity to hold it and the suffering without being triggered into reaction, and respond with caring and discernment, just in a very short form. I think as a ongoing practice, when I find myself feeling triggered by listening to the news, I don't stay with the news. I immediately bring it to my own body and drop the thoughts and meet the feelings that I have, like the heaviness of and the weightiness in my body of despair. And if I'm able to separate the feelings from the thoughts that my despair is about climate change, and to feel the despair, which is what Joanna Macy is saying, whether personally or as part of a community, with awareness and love, the despair dissolves. And then the perspective that I have around climate change is different, because it hasn't, the reason there was despair is because perception wasn't accurate in the first place. It was, impaired. The perception was impaired right from the beginning, from an inner reaction. And so when we're able to challenge those stories of, yes, I should feel despair because it's terrible, and yes, I don't have any agency because it's terrible. When we challenge that by dropping the storyline and feeling the feelings, and then bringing a perception without impairment to the situation, there isn't any reactivity. So then it's clear that whatever it is that's calling us into action is calling us into action with the beautiful qualities of the mind, like feeling faith. So for example, as I hear what's going on in the world and the ignorance going on that's being expressed, several things happen for me. One is it becomes, and you've heard me say this before, it becomes an inspiration for me to challenge my own ignorance. That's the first thing. To become more disciplined about enacting anything that's unskillful and unwholesome. And the second part that comes up for me is a clarity about what I'm doing in my life and its contribution to the world, and a lot of faith in that. And then the third thing that comes to me in that clarity and in my sense of rootedness in community, in all the communities that I'm rooted in, is belonging to the historical movement of liberation that's happened for thousands of years, from women thousands of years, and Jews, and as an immigrant myself, and the challenges of being an immigrant, as someone who has worked through a lot of sickness and been disabled some of my life, all, and navigated the disenfranchisement of those places, all of them become the grounds for building or continuing to build a liberation movement and keeping it alive generation after generation. I have no idea if the conditions are going to come into being in a way where that liberation might take more hold. I have no idea about that, but I do know, just like in the struggle for apartheid in South Africa, when so many people were underground or out of the country or in jail, that there was still this thread of struggle and resistance, even though it wasn't so much well, it was above ground, even though it was so repressed by the police state, that there was a thread that continued in these small communities in Tanzania, in Kenya, in England, and support groups in England, then in all the universities fighting for what's the word for getting money out of South African companies? What's that word? Disinvestment. And the economic sanctions. That there were all these threads, that conditions just came together, you know, and then they sort of fall apart, like the Black Power movement, and then coming together in a new way with Black Lives, beautiful way, more women leadership, more responsibility and accountability, much hindered on love and compassion, and so it feels our movements, Dharma movements, committed to the bodhisattva role of structural and cultural liberation. Feels like we're a stream joining other streams, and that it's just the opposite of feeling depressed or overwhelmed, because there's so much of our work happening and manifesting. It's so beautiful. And this exactly what's happening, this linking of spiritual practice with politics, in the same way that the liberationist movement in Argentina and Uruguay and Chile and Honduras and Mexico with the I'm so tired. No, with the Zapatistas.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, that now there's such an explicit linking again of spiritual practice with structural and cultural political practice. And what could be more exciting than that?
It's a real saving of all sentient beings, which is mutual between us. Tassajara is a bodhisattva training ground.
Exactly.
And I feel like I've been involved in that training. So our training is like slightly different, but the result is the same, and the concern is the same, and finding compassion is the same. That's really beautiful.